If you know anything about Monster Hunter, whether new to the series or a veteran, it should be pretty obvious that there are only 14 weapons in the series. We started with a smaller, minuscule selection of 6 in Generation 1, and then 7 with the inclusion of the dual blades. We saw the introduction of Longsword, Gun Lance, Hunting Horn, and Bow in Generation 2, followed by the Switch Axe in Gen 3, and finally the Charge Blade and Insect Glaive in Generation 4. That's a total of 14 weapons, but astute hunters will tell you that that's not necessarily the case. While some may make the argument that Tonfas, Magnet Spike, and Excel Axes exist within games like Monster Hunter Frontier or Monster Hunter Explorer, there's actually one mainline weapon that was only ever seen in one entry in the series. I'm of course talking about the medium bowgun, a weapon that was designed for Monster Hunter Tri specifically and never saw the light of day outside of that, even failing to reappear in 3 Ultimate, which was the G-Rank expansion of Tri. This is going to be the last entry in the weapons series. It was a long road and some weapons were more popular than others, but we're finally here. Today we're going to be talking about the bowguns, including light, medium, and heavy. We'll look at them within each generation, their differences and their similarities, and see what the general meta may have been for them within said entries, while mostly focusing on mechanical changes and evolution for the weapons as we progress throughout the years. As I mentioned in previous videos, I'd like to take your opinions into consideration when it comes to which weapon I will cover next. Unfortunately, this is the last weapon video, so instead let me know what other type of Monster Hunter history videos you'd like to see, or just videos in general focusing on other series you may enjoy. Also, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing so Susan and the YouTube algorithm will release my family. This is it. I've finally tracked down the algorithm headquarters, located near that one spiral staircase in Dust 2 B Tunnel. I'm going to climb the staircase without clipping and finally face off against the algorithm to save my kids. Anyway, I'm Super Rad, and this is the history of the bowguns. To get something out of the way early, you'll notice that a lot of the features within one gun type are also features of another. That's one of the main reasons these videos have been combined, because the light and heavy bowguns have so many similarities, but that doesn't mean there aren't any differences. Starting with the light bowgun, this was possibly the most popular option for hunters in the early generations due to its high mobility and ease of use. Due to its lightweight nature, the light bowgun allows hunters to jog around the map unsheathed at a smooth pace and sheath and unsheath the weapon fairly quickly. Compare this to the slower and more methodical heavy bowgun that has the player walking around at reduced speed and also has a long animation for unsheathing or sheathing the weapon. Light bowgun also has a bigger focus on elemental damage, meaning there's an overall set of better options for monster weaknesses, and generally they were easier to craft in comparison to their heavier alternative. But outside of effectiveness and speed, there actually weren't many mechanical changes between the two guns. Light bowgun could be considered more effective, but the overall complexity and work that went into a bowgun was so dense that it was actually a fairly unpopular option for hunters within the first 2 generations at least. Rather than breaking down their moves first, let's actually talk about what makes a bowgun a bowgun. Each bowgun is broken up into multiple factors outside of whether or not they are light or heavy. For example, many of the guns have different reloading speeds, ranging from very slow to very fast, with a few options in between. However, I only ever really saw the normal reload speed on light bowguns. The guns even have recoil types, but when I looked at every selection offered to me in Monster Hunter Freedom, I only ever saw moderate as the sole option. That being said, these are the following types listed: strong, moderate, light, weak, very weak, and weakest. However, we'll soon discuss ways to remedy this if necessary for the player. The upgrading process for the bowguns isn't as simple as other weapon types in the series, especially in Gen 1. The name of the game is upgrading through modification and customization. The light and heavy bowgun have multiple upgrades and modification options to choose from to fine-tune it to one's liking depending on the situation. First is the attack modifier, which can be upgraded from level 1 to level 5 and acts as a pure attack damage boost. Next is the zoom scope. Traditionally, the hunter always has a scope on their gun that allows for precise aiming and can enter into this mode by pressing the R or R1 button. With a zoom scope installed, hunters gain the ability to change the zoom on their view with either the D-pad or the right analog stick, which can lead to more precise aiming, but I highly doubt this was useful in early generations. More useful are the silence and long barrel weapon modifications. Hunters would have to choose between one or the other depending on the situation and playstyle. The silencer functioned as a way to lessen the amount of aggro on the monster, but unfortunately less aggro is equivalent to less damage output. The upside of this is that it is also a means of lowering the recoil, which can help players having difficulty with some of the more ballistic ammo options or animations. Additionally, it helps in multiplayer because while you will be outputting less damage, you'll also find yourself being interrupted less as well. The long barrel has the opposite effect. It's another means of getting a damage boost on top of the attack modification and is good for solo play since you'll have the monster's full attention regardless. However, I'm not completely sure if it raises the recoil on the weapons it's installed on. Regardless, there's a good chance that the long barrel was one of the more useful weapon modifications modifications on top of the attack modifier. On top of these modifications, the bowgun used a large amount of finite ammo that either needed to be actively purchased or crafted. It's not surprising why this weapon may not have been popular considering how much grinding would be necessary to make preferred ammo types in order to be as effective as possible. Let's get one thing out of the way. Every bowgun, whether it is light or heavy, is different, and each different bowgun has different ammo it's allowed to use. One that can use Dragon might not be able to use Thunder, and one that uses Pierce may not be able to use Pellet. Some might use level 2 ammo while others use level 3. There's a lot of depth and nuance to each gun. The effectiveness of combat-specific shots are based on their shot type, shot level, and the range in which they connect with the monster. For example, this chart shows the effective range for Normal and Pierce and Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, but the same could be said for games in Generation 1. Normal shots were the base ammo type that was available to hunters, being the absolute cheapest and easiest to obtain, but also being the least effective overall. They had a mid-range of distance effectiveness or critical distance and would fire a single round per shot. Other combat types included Pierce, Pellet, Craig, Cluster, and Disc. Pierce was great for its multi-hit properties and long effective range, meaning you could play it a bit safer when using the ammo and stay away from the monster as much as possible. Pellet acted as a multi-round shotgun style that would start with 3 pellets per shot but gain an extra pellet per level, meaning level 3 shots had the potential of shooting 5 rounds. Craig was useful for breaking monster parts because it would latch onto them like a sticky grenade before exploding. I believe in Monster Hunter 1 this would do a base level of fire damage followed by true damage with the explosion, and from what I understand, it may have had both sonic bomb and KO properties, but I haven't been able to verify that. Cluster would break off into multiple smaller projectiles on contact and then have them all explode. It was considered one of the strongest and most useful ammo types within this generation. Monster Hunter 1 specifically introduced a special ammo type called the Disc Shot, which would fire a disc with the ability to ricochet around for multiple hits. This didn't appear in Freedom, but would show up again in various ways later in the series. Unlike the other combat types, Disc didn't seem to have multiple levels. Monster Hunter 1 introduced Dragon Element ammo, which could only be used on very specific bowguns, but Freedom would introduce other elemental specific ammo like Fire, Thunder, and Ice, though this would be a mistype as Ice wasn't even in the series yet as an element. The actual element being used was Water. In Generation 1, Flame and Dragon both acted as normal shots, while Ice and Thunder acted as Pierce. On top of the various combat ammo options, the bowgun actually has many support types to utilize while in a hunt. Recovery, as an example, is great for healing party members, and Monster Hunter 1 specifically had an antidote type that would cure poison. It has demon and armor shots that could bestow attack and defense boosts, as well as multiple status ailment bullets like poison, stun, and sleep. Recovery, demon, and armor were pellet types in this generation, while the status shots were normal, but that's not all. There were paint shots for marking the monsters on the map, trank shots to capture monsters, and even dung shots to get rid of invading species or any annoying monster that you weren't hunting at the time. Okay, so those are all of the options for the bowgun, but how do you actually use it? Focusing on Psp Controls, you could use the triangle button to unsheath your weapon, but you'll either have to be stationary or you'll be forced into a stationary position. This isn't a melee weapon, you can't do a draw attack here. The weapon starts unloaded and you'll have to press the triangle to load in whatever ammo you have selected. To select the specific type of ammo you brought with you, you'll need to hold L and use triangle and X to cycle through your options. Once loaded, the weapon is as simple as can be. You simply press the circle to shoot. That's it. Wow, I know. But the power seen within something like the heavy bowgun or cluster spamming light bowgun is actually fairly impressive within this generation, even if it's not some of the best options for you out there. You can press the R button to enter into scoped aiming mode, and as I mentioned previously, if using a zoom scope, you can zoom in and out. However, you're completely stationary while in this mode, so it's ill-advised to stay here for too long if dealing with any advancing monster, especially solo. There's also a melee attack that can be performed by pressing triangle and circle, but this is effectively useless, especially in the early generations. Finally, under the health and stamina gauges, you'll see how many shots are left in your clip. While you can hold something like 99 normal shots, you can only load 6 at a time, and the game will let you know that you need to reload by either saying so on the empty clip or on your reticule while using the scope. One final thing to make note of this generation onward, all the way up to and including Generation 4, is that the gear was originally separated by class. By that, I mean that you had Blade Masters who used any of the melee weapons and Gunners who used bow, light bowgun, or heavy bowgun. Each set that came from a monster or gathering item would have 2 versions, one for melee and one for ranged, with melee having armor skills that benefit those types of weapons as well as having higher defense overall. On the opposite end, Gunners would have lower overall defense as a way of balancing the range. Equipping a ranged weapon while wearing Blade Master gear would unequip all of it except for the helmet. Despite there being Blade Master and Gunner specific helmets, they remained equipable regardless of which weapon you were using. Now that's only Generation 1. Let's head over to Generation 2 to see all of the mechanical changes as well as the additions to the light and heavy bowgun throughout each entry in the series. One of the biggest mechanics the second generation brought to bowguns was the ability to aim over the shoulder by pressing the R button instead of tapping it to enter first person mode. The advantage of this over the shoulder perspective is that not only do you have the ability to aim, but you can move around while doing so, unlike first person, which forces you to be stationary. This is a nice option, but especially with the Psp controls, it's rather awkward to use effectively, and you'd probably find yourself staying stationary anyway. Quality of life improvement was also added, allowing hunters to have infinite rounds of normal shot level 1. In the original games, not bringing any ammo into a hunt would effectively leave you powerless. The bowgun absolutely had to have some sort of preparation in order to make it at all useful. Generation 2 is a bit more lenient with this. Now that the hunter has infinite normal shots, running out of ammo, while not ideal, is also not the end of the world. Normal level 1 is so pathetically useless though, so I really can't stress enough how important it is to prepare beforehand. And even then, you still actually need to bring normal level 1 and have it in your inventory, so the preparation is still kinda there. Elemental ammo also mark the return in this entry and are surprisingly not affected by range. An interesting tidbit, meaning bringing them as a means to utilize monsters' weaknesses can really make your life easier. On top of that, some of the shot types for elemental have been reworked. While the fire element will function as normal shot level 2, all of the other elements function as pierce. Generation 2 also introduced shot deviations, which would change the trajectory of your shot per round fired. You may have a gun that has bullets traveling slightly to the left or slightly to the right, or a combination of both. There's also been some larger deviations made to help distinguish between light bowgun and heavy bowgun. While light continues to have the upgrades you'd expect from Generation 1, including the zoom scope, silencer, and long barrel, the heavy bowgun now has access to the shield and power barrel. Power barrel will add a 10% attack boost to the base attack of the weapon and apparently also increases precision according to this GameFAQs damage guide I'm reading here. The shield allows the hunter to block while idle, and the guard up armor skill will actually affect this, allowing the gunner to block even more attacks than you may expect. One brand new mechanic is rapid fire, which is only available on select light bowguns and allows the hunter to fire off multiple shots at the cost of 1 with a power modifier. For example, the hunter could fire at normal shot level 1 and it would produce 5 shots at 80% the normal damage output, but if they all connect, would effectively output the damage of 4 shots per round. I believe. I'm not a mathematician, so I may be misunderstanding the numbers and charts I'm looking at. If that's the case, feel free to correct me in the comments. The downside of the ability is that the recoil is huge, and you may be better off firing normally due to how much more consistent and fast you can be when recoil is manageable. This is a hard-coded recoil value that can't be affected by any skills or upgrades, so if using rapid fire, you're stuck with it. Finally, time to move on to Generation 3 and take a look at an entry that boosted the level of customization for the bowguns to new heights and introduce a fan favorite to the series. I'm sure you know what I am talking about. Monster Hunter Tri really went above and beyond with the customizability of the bowguns, specifically allowing you to essentially craft any type of gun you wanted with many varying effects based on how you set it up. Let's start simple enough. You do not simply buy or craft a light or heavy bowgun. Instead, you have 3 pieces that are necessary to make the gun functional, those being the frame, the stock, and the barrel. The frame is the base for all of the stats on your weapon that will be modified slightly by the other options that you choose from. The frame's main factors are the weight, range, reload, recoil, and deviation. Deviation was introduced previously, but is now made more obvious to the player in terms of how their shots will travel. For example, a high-level R deviation will always travel to the right at a sharp arc, while a low-level LR deviation could go left or right on a shorter trajectory. This is a big factor when choosing which gun you plan to make, as it is beneficial to know the trajectory of your shots ahead of time in order to be consistent. Frames come with many variations, but one major thing to watch out for is whether or not the frame requires a folding stock. Think of this like unsheathing a heavy bowgun in previous generations. It's slower and there's a bit of an animation buildup until you actually are able to use this weapon. Using different frames that don't have this aspect will be faster overall than unsheathing them. It should be mentioned that the frame is also the determining factor in what types of shots can be used. Barrel is specifically set up to modify the range of your weapon, meaning you can affect the critical distance of your shot types to figure out a comfy distance that best suits you. This acts as the older generation barrel mods and can have additional factors like the shield seen in Generation 2. Additionally, some modifications including the barrel and stock that we'll touch on in a second can have decoration slots, meaning your options for armor skills can be widened. Stocks on the other hand affect recoil and reload speed and are generally used to lessen the effect of these stats. Some stocks will lower the recoil specifically, some will lower the reload time, and some will even do both while offering decoration slots. There's a lot of options. So is it just the frame that dictates what type of bowgun you're using? Not exactly. If you remember, I mentioned that the frame flame has a weight. Well, this is not exclusive to that aspect of the bowgun. The barrel and stock also have weights, and once fully put together, all three pieces will contribute to your weight total to dictate what type of bowgun you are using. Any gun below a weight limit of 30 is considered a light bowgun. Anything above 30 but below 70 is a medium bowgun, and anything higher is a heavy bowgun. Both medium bowguns and light bowguns have the same movement speed and general animations depending on the frame, but the light bowgun gains this new sidestep/hopping ability that can be utilized for positioning purposes and is performed in between shots similar to sidestepping in between attacks. Meanwhile, heavy bowguns act as you would expect, having the hunter move slowly and methodically. The advantages should be obvious. You get more mobility the lighter you go, but less effective damage. Meanwhile, the heavier your weapon is, the more damage you'll be outputting per shot. That being said, stronger isn't always better, and just like in previous generations, sometimes the faster and more mobile option can be more consistent and effective. Some new shot types include Wyvern Fire, which is similar to the gun lance. It requires a charged up animation and fires off a shot that is 1 part fixed fire elemental damage and 1 part modified damage based on the bowgun being used at the time. There's also the subtype that is made to be utilized by the game's underwater mechanic. It functions like pellet but gets additional hits when underwater and is a more effective option than pellet when doing so. Slicing functions like Craigshell but offers cutting damage, meaning gunners now have an actually viable option for cutting tails. Exhaust is another new shot type that is strictly for KO and exhaust damage. While most elemental shots remain unchanged, Dragon became more of an arced shot that falls over time and deals multiple hits while falling. This is potentially the most convoluted the bowgun has ever gotten and will ever get. The amount of customization and options, while interesting, required much more work and preparation in comparison to any other weapon type in the series, and most likely turned players off of using it. Luckily, this would change semi-permanently with Portable Third Onward. Portable Third and Onward into 3 Ultimate reintroduced the classic definitions of light and heavy bowgun, while removing medium bowgun entirely and reintroducing the normal customization mechanics we've come to expect from Generation 1 and 2, including shields and power barrels. One new inclusion introduced in Portable Third is Siege Mode for heavy bowguns, which allows the user to hunker down and fire off specific ammo types, usually 2 types that are dependent on which heavy bowgun you were using at the time. When in this mode, recoil is significantly lower, and the clip size is much higher, meaning it's a great opportunity to get large swaths of damage if the monster is not actively aggroed to you. For the light bowgun, sidestepping and backhopping remained included from Tri. Most ammo types from Tri carried over as well, aside from Wyvern's Fire, which skipped Portable Third and returned in 3 Ultimate. On top of the Gen 3 ammo types, 3 Ultimate also brings slime shots into the equation, and I'm sure you can guess what they do. Come on. It's slime. Now, Tri alone was a lot for bowguns, but let's take some time to move on to Generation 4 and see what verticality, hunter arts, and hunter skills offered to each weapon. Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate's biggest mechanical changes had to be the limiter removal, which removes certain mechanics from the light and heavy bowguns in exchange for some new ones. The light bowgun will lose the ability to rapid fire and sidestep or back hop, but in turn gains the ability to reload all of its ammo types at once. This gives light bowgun the ability to swap between shots without the need to reload again, meaning that the amount of shots that can be fired off before a reload has increased significantly. This reload can be performed by pressing X and A together, and the traditional reload can be performed by just pressing X. For heavy bowgun, the limiter removal slows you down even further, removes siege mode, and prevents the hunter from being able to roll after a shot, but offers a huge raw boost, and offers the siege clip increase to all ammo types that would be used within siege mode. For jumping attacks, the light and heavy bowgun can perform a jumping reload attack by pressing X while midair. It'll reload the clip and perform mounting damage. Light bowgun can also chain 2 side steps or back hops in a row. As always for Monster Hunter Generations and Generations Ultimate, I'll be focusing on the key aspects of the weapon meta rather than listing every style and every art possible. There's better guides for that, and I suggest you check them out in your free time if it interests you. In the meantime, we can take a look at some of the more effective options for killing monsters as fast and effectively as possible. Also, while this may have been a function in previous games, it's good to note that the bowgun would reload bullets at the start of the reloading animation, meaning you could start the animation and then cancel it via a bomb, ledge, or screen transition in order to save time overall. Starting with the light bowgun, the weapon was heavily dominated by adept style due to its high mobility via adept dodging, as well as a mechanic known as power reloads, which could be utilized through this style. At the cost of losing their side and back step mechanics, hunters can now follow up the adept dodge mechanic with a power reload or power run. Power reload specifically reloads the selected ammo type instantly and gives it a 5% damage boost for a period of 10 seconds. Power run can be performed before or after a reload has started and causes the hunter to run in a specified direction at a high speed for a long period of time. The hunter can cancel out of the run with a roll, and if they power run while power reloading, they get the effect of both mechanics. However, power running before a power reload will make it impossible to perform the power reload until another accessible adept dodge. Adept style was way more aggressive in comparison to some other options due to the ability to shoot after a power reload to cancel the recovery frames. Some changes to the game's control settings even made it possible to turn around, aim, and shoot after the reload. For styles, there weren't many worth utilizing on Adept Light Bowgun outside of absolute readiness, though Full House could be seen if Striker style was being utilized. Full House is the exact same mechanic as removing the limiter from the Light Bowgun in Monster Hunter 4, allowing the hunter to reload all of their ammo types at once, making switching between them much faster. Tier 1 and Tier 2 would reload everything except rapid fire ammo, while Tier 3 would reload everything including rapid fire ammo. Activating this once in a hunt will give you the permanent ability to reload an ammo type, switch to another ammo type, and not lose the previously reloaded bullets. Moving on to Heavy Bowgun, this is another weapon that was absolutely dominated by Valor mode. Now, while not in a Valor state, the hunter isn't going to be able to enter Siege mode, but there's some great aspects available to you from the get-go, specifically the ability to power reload out of the sheath cancel by pressing X while sheathing. This will perform a Valor reload similar to the Light Bowgun Adept reload, which can be timed to be slightly faster and gives the 5% damage boost. Now, the Light Bowgun actually also has the ability to power reload through Valor, but it should be noted that power reloading the Light Bowgun while in Adept gives us a 5% damage boost, but while in Valor it does not. It's a common misconception within the two styles. Back to the Heavy Bowgun, the Valor power reload will offer a damage boost and fill the Valor gauge. Slicing ammo was one of the most beneficial shot types for building gauge due to its multi-hit properties and could help save on piercing ammo. Once in Valor state, the Heavy Bowgun hunter gains an inherent evasion +2 skill and can once again enter Siege mode while also gaining the ability to roll out of Siege mode. Siege mode is even more powerful while in this state as well, and the hunter's fire rate will increase over time as you fire off shots. While firing out of Siege mode, you can hold B in a direction to begin a power run at high speed at no cost to stamina, making it highly useful due to the Heavy Bowgun's lack of mobility. Generally, you wouldn't see any Heavy Bowgun specific hunter art applied to the weapon while in this state. Instead, Mass Combiner, a general art, would be brought along and allows the hunter to get the most out of their combinations while increasing the combination's success rate. Fun fact, since combining during a hunt is such an important aspect, it's actually advantageous to combine during the Valor Sheath as a safer option, as if you do get hit, you'll only take 30% of the damage. Outside of weapon-specific mechanics, Geo introduced many new ammo types. The biggest change is the new internal ammo feature, which is a generic default ammo that the hunter brings on every hunt without the need to restock. There's a lot of internal ammo, and a lot of it is effectively useless. Some of the major inclusions include internal element ammo that was useful due to elemental weaknesses like Pierce Water 3 or Pierce Fire 2, etc. However, Slicing level 1 and 2 were also internal and mechanically useful, as they could be used for cutting damage into severed tails, and like I mentioned, they could be used in Valor mode. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's move on to the final generation of Monster Hunter, Generation 5, and see what changed for Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun in World, Iceborne, and Monster Hunter Rise. There's some generic mechanical changes introduced in Monster Hunter World for both the Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun. The biggest change, however, is the overall feel of the bowguns with how they move and act in the game. It is a much more fluid, over-the-shoulder, third-person experience now in comparison to the previous games, and aiming has become much easier. On top of that, the hunters can now move while shooting and even move while reloading, which heavily upgrades their mobility overall and turns Monster Hunter into a glorified third-person shooter. Fortnite shit. Another example of mechanical change is the ability to hold down triangle to reload. This will begin reloading your currently selected ammo and then follow up by reloading all other ammo in order from top to bottom. There's also the inclusion of special ammo types and multiple other features. Mods have changed drastically since old school entries, and there's multiple new mods and factors that you need to understand before utilizing them. For example, the rarity of your gun dictates how many mods you can actually apply to it. Rarity 1 and 2 guns can apply 1 mod, and some higher rarities can apply 2, and then the highest rarities can apply 3, at least in World's base game. Additionally, these mods don't seem to be based on the location they would be placed on the weapon anymore, meaning you can simply fill up each of your available slots with whichever mod you want without worrying about overlap. The mods have also been meshed together, meaning Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun have, for the majority, the same options, with the only difference being that Heavy Bowgun is still the only weapon that can equip the shield mod. Mods can even be applied multiple times to amplify a desired effect if you don't care about variety. Reload assist and recoil/deviation suppressor suppressors are pretty self-explanatory as we've seen them in previous entries, but they offer good bonuses. Close range up and a ranged attack up or attack bonuses for close range and long range respectively, meaning they complement specific ammo types better than others. Speaking of specific ammo types, there's a few new options in Monster Hunter World. Basically, pellets seem to have been substituted for spread, which has a similar shotgun effect, and Craig has been replaced with a new shot type called sticky. Let's talk about the Lipogun first. Pressing circle will load a special ammo and allow the hunter to place down a new special ammo type unique to the bowgun called Wyvern Blast. It's a ground-based mine that can be detonated by a hunter attacking it or having a monster run over it. The special ammo types are shown above your traditional ammo type and have a finite number of rounds. Wyvern Blast also doesn't disappear after an explosion. Rather, the hunter can force them to explode multiple times based on how much damage is inflicted to the mine at a given time. Weakly hitting the mine multiple times could cause it to explode up to 5 times, but slightly stronger attacks can cause larger and more damaging explosions up to 3 times. Finally, very powerful hits can cause an even larger explosion from the mine, which can be detonated twice. Additionally, the sliding dash from Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate makes a reappearance and has been integrated into the sidestep of the light bowgun. By pressing X in a direction after a shot, the hunter will sidestep. If they press X again during this animation, they'll perform a sliding dash. The sliding dash is very similar to the previous entry and does have iframes, making it highly valuable for effective mobility. Moving on to heavy bowgun, this weapon type actually has 2 special ammo options, those being Wyvern Heart and Wyvern Snipe, and which option you have is dependent on which heavy bowgun you are using. Wyvern Heart effectively turns the heavy bowgun into a machine gun where the damage ramps up over time while you hold the trigger down. You load it by pressing circle and can unload it at any time by pressing the same button. You aren't locked into using the full clip and can save some of Wyvern Heart for later if you need to get out of a sticky situation. However, fully using it is the main means of getting it to begin recharging so that you can once again have a full clip. Now, Wyvern Snipe is a little more simplistic. Loading this ammo will cause the hunter to go into a prone stance while aiming. Once fired, the shot will perform piercing damage in the monster before exploding for additional damage. Since this is a piercing ammo type, you'd use it like you would on any other monster, trying to get the bullet to pass through in a way that it gets the most damage during its trajectory. Jumping and aerial attacks are still what you would expect, and sliding attacks have been incorporated, but it is effectively the same as a ledge jump. That being said, you can unsheath and fire while sliding if desired. Now, Iceborne doesn't bring much in the form of changes to the base weaponry, but it does add some new light bowgun and heavy bowgun specific mods, and also allows the hunter to switch to their slinger while aiming. For light bowgun, you get evading reload and Wyvern Blast mods. The evading reload will allow the hunter to reload a small amount of ammo while performing the sliding dash after a sidestep, and this mod can be stacked to reload more ammo with each dash. Meanwhile, the Wyvern Blast mod is set up to allow the hunter to fire a Wyvern Blast mine forward rather than simply placing it on the ground. I believe this has good stagger potential, so it's possible to utilize it as a counter option on advancing monsters. It should be noted that the Wyvern Blast mod doesn't stack and can only be equipped once. For heavy bowgun, you get Wyvern Heart mod and a new sniper scope that can be equipped and unequipped manually while in the field. The Wyvern Heart mod is simply a damage multiplier change, raising the overall damage that continuous Wyvern Heart firing can ramp up to. Only one of these can be equipped at a time. For the Wyvern Snipe mod, you gain access to a special scope that you can equip or unequip at will, and also gain access to the new super critical distance mode. When aiming down your new scope, you can line up your shot so the reticle glows orange and gets a large damage multiplier. Additionally, the sniper no longer performs piercing damage naturally, instead providing higher damage overall, especially on weak points. To make up for this, you can now super critical distance with any ammo type, even the sniper type, for some pretty insane damage numbers. We can now move on to Monster Hunter Rise and discuss the various changes that were made to the World Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun, as well as the additions of multiple Silkbind abilities and switch skills for each. There's a lot to go over, so buckle up. One of the bigger changes is how Rise tries to limit movement for Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun based on the additions made to World. Now only certain ammo types will allow you to move while shooting or reload while shooting, and they are denoted by an icon beside the description or when you have them selected on the field. There's also an icon for single fire reload, which seems to be new. It's a blue triangle that denotes that a weapon will reload immediately after firing a single shot. You can move around during this animation even if the ammo type doesn't have the move while reloading icon active. Finally, there's also an icon for rapid firing, which is 2 orange triangles. This was actually technically a mechanic in World and Iceborne. Mobile shooting and reloading was tied to the ammo's recoil and reload stats, recoil/reload +1 and +2, the lowest and fastest, enabled movement, while +3 and +4 kept you stationary when firing and reloading. Mechanically, these weapons are very similar to their world predecessor, with Heavy Bowgun finally gaining the ability to sidestep instead of rolling in between shots. It can even chain the sidesteps at the cost of stamina and gain the ability to hold down the shot button in order to charge a shot before firing. While it is an option, it's not highly utilized and only really good for when a monster doesn't align with your original shot. It should be noted that the Wyvern Snipe on Heavy Bowgun also has the piercing damage again. On top of that, the typical Bogon mods you would expect from previous entries have marked the return, and the setup and world has been removed completely. Starting with Light Bowgun, let's go over the Silkbind attacks and switch skills. First is Silkbind Glide, and from what I can tell, it is not highly utilized. It functions mostly as a gap closer, but allows the hunter to fire off one high motion value shot at the end of an animation that performs cutting damage instead of shot damage, meaning it could be used for severing tails. The downside is that it forces a reload every time no matter what, so you'll end up finding yourself stuck if used improperly. This ability costs 2 wirebugs. Next up is Fanning Vault, which launches the hunter into the air and allows them to perform a few aerial attacks, including attaching a Wyvern Blast to a monster. It's a cool looking move, but also not heavily utilized due to it being swappable with the next ability that is arguably more effective. I'm talking about Fanning Maneuver, which will shoot out a wirebug and allow the hunter to travel in an arc around a radius, which is great for adding maneuverability while staying within critical distance. Both fanning abilities cost 1 wirebug. For switch skills, Light Bowgun can swap out its traditional reload for a slower option called Elemental Reload. While it may be slower, it will boost the damage of all elemental shots, making it highly useful when fighting monsters with big elemental weaknesses. Finally, the forward dodge on Light Bowgun can be swapped out for a new quick step evade. It's really personal preference on this one, as the quick step is a bit shorter and faster than the normal dodge. However, if you fire immediately after the quick step, it will have increased damage. Moving on to Heavy Bowgun, it has a similar Silkbind Glide to the Light Bowgun called Free Silkbind Glide, so I won't talk about it too much, but more importantly, it has the counter shot ability that nullifies all damage and can be followed up with a high damage round that launches the hunter backwards. Very useful and most likely more utilized over its swappable ability, the Counter Charger, which is a parry counter that speeds up the charging on charged shots. Since you'll be rarely using charged shots anyway, the choice seems pretty clear here. For switch skills, the generic melee attack that is rarely if ever utilized can now be swapped out for a shoulder tackle. That has some super armor elements to it, meaning you may not get knocked back, but will still take some damage. It's probably also going to be barely used, but it does seem to have more mechanical advantages over the melee attack. Finally, there is the Healing Mech Wyvern Snipe skill. If you are confused about what Mech Wyvern Snipe is, just know that this is a mistranslation and localization and actually means Wyvern Heart / Wyvern Snipe. The ability will turn your damage dealing special ammo into a support based ammo and allow you to heal teammates by riddling them full of holes. With World and Rise, the distinction between Light Bowgun and Heavy Bowgun was strengthened slightly, and the two weapons have different advantages and disadvantages that are more noticeable than in previous generations. However, that's finally all I have to say about the Bowguns in Generation 5. The Bowguns have always been a fairly complex weapon option for hunters. It can be daunting to want to try ranged weapons when melee can sometimes feel like it requires much less preparation overall. Generally, you'll see melee players first try out the bow thanks to its ease of access before moving on to the meatier alternatives. While the older generations may have been excruciatingly painful in the amount of preparation and crafting that was required for the guns, making them highly unappealing, the weapons slowly formed into true powerhouses. Thanks to multiple quality of life improvements, they have never been more accessible or easy to get into and try out. This marks the end of the weapon series in terms of Monster Hunter history videos, so I'll just take a quick second now to say thank you to everyone that watched them. Each one of these videos took anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to create, through research, writing, proofreading, getting others to proofread, recording footage from each game, and so much more. I know these videos don't cover absolutely everything, but I feel like at least they've covered the big mechanical changes of each weapon where possible. If there's something I missed, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know what your favorite weapon is and what kind of Monster Hunter video you want me to cover next. I'm also streaming regularly on Twitch now, and our Discord is growing rapidly, so if you want to join the community and maybe participate in viewer hunts, feel free to stop by. Hey, thank you so much. You made it to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. And this is the section where I go ahead and shout out all of the patrons that have been supporting me on Patreon. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can. There's a middle tier that puts your name in the credits, which should be here right now, I think. And there's a third tier where you get shouted out by me, which is what I'm doing right now, so enjoy. Karen Tall, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. I appreciate it. It's very based and rad-pilled of you to be pledging like that. It's awesome. Carl the Crab, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. Amazing. Void Paradox, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I Am Kanan, thank you so much for that. I think it's amazing that you decided to throw a G-rank tier my rate. Moal Kasemi, thank you so much. I always have trouble pronouncing your name. I'm really sorry about that, but I want you to know it is greatly appreciated with the G-rank tier. I hope you continue to enjoy the videos. Rob3, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. Agatosh, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. We do a little gaming. Thank you for the little bit of the G-rank tier you sent me. King, thank you so much. The Kinky King, I appreciate it. Ryan Marion, thank you so much. Cyberworm, thank you so much. Mogbit, thank you so much. Crunchy Cowroo, thank you so much. Kathleen Medjuk, thank you so much. Johnathan, thank you. Thank you so much, Johnathan. And Strange Lee, of course, thank you for the G-rank tier. Ben VB, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. I really appreciate it. Longtime supporter. Lude Hafumi, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. You're amazing. Rosa Leo, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. Thank you. I think I'm actually streaming this right now. I think they're watching still. Justin Regal, thank you so much for the G-rank tier. And Mr. Janky, my friend, thank you for the G-rank tier, guys. Hey, I'm editing this right now, and Maz just pledged back into tier 3, so thank you so much for that, Maz. Really appreciate it, and thank you for doing that, and I'll see you again later. Bye. You're too good to me. I really do appreciate it, and I will just say that I really had a lot of fun making these history videos, and I will see you in the next video.